Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A city brushed with icy winds in winter and blooming warmth in spring. Among its brick-laced neighborhoods and manicured lawns stood the Halden residence. A modest two-story home with baby blue shutters and a white picket fence. It was the kind of house that whispered peace, the kind couples imagined when dreaming of forever. Inside lived Lena Halden and her husband Thomas Halden, a couple in their mid-30s who, by all accounts, had everything. A stable marriage, financial security, and no children to complicate their world. To neighbors, they were enviable, quiet, polite, punctual. Lena taught yoga part-time at a wellness studio downtown, and Thomas worked remotely as a senior software developer. They hosted barbecues in the summer and lit string lights in December. But as with many perfect pictures, the frame hid the cracks beneath. To Lena, every ticking clock, every email ping, every evening dinner with Thomas felt like a dull echo of a life she hadn't asked for. While the house was calm, her heart was not. Their marriage, once rooted in deep affection, had become mechanical, like the metronome on her old piano. Reliable, predictable, exhaustingly still. Thomas, soft-spoken and cerebral, adored Lena. He noticed her drifting but assumed it was stress. "Take some time off," he told her one evening as he reheated leftover pasta, a dish he thought she liked. She gave him a tired smile, took a bite, and nodded without saying much. She hadn't told him yet, but yoga wasn't her escape anymore. The studio was just a place, and lately even that wasn't enough. What she craved wasn't peace. It was feeling chaos, fire, passion. Something to remind her she was still alive. The truth was Lena had been quietly unraveling for months. A storm had been building beneath her skin. She smiled at Thomas in public, kissed him goodnight out of habit, and let his gentle touch brush past her like wind through a curtain. Felt, but never held. At night, she stared at the ceiling and imagined other lives. Ones where her heart raced from more than caffeine. Ones where passion didn't taste like comfort but danger. Ones where she wasn't married to a man who never raised his voice, never questioned her absences, and never noticed the cold inching into their shared bed. The breaking point wasn't loud. It came in silence. A Sunday morning where Thomas, sitting on the porch with his laptop and coffee, asked, "Do you want to go apple picking this fall?" Lena blinked. Apple picking? Again? Something inside her snapped. She went upstairs, shut the bathroom door, and stared at her reflection. There, behind her eyes, was a woman she didn't recognize anymore. A woman who once dreamt of wild things now stuck in quiet routines. She didn't cry. She just stared. And then she made a decision. Not to leave. Not yet. But to feel again. She didn't know it then. But this decision, born in silence, would end in screams, poison, and voltage. The picture-perfect house on Pine Street would soon become a crime scene. It began the way forbidden things often do, innocently. Lena had returned to teaching yoga at Zen Body Wellness Studio 3 afternoons a week. The studio sat above a quiet cafe in downtown Milwaukee, flooded with natural light and painted in earthy tones. It was her sanctuary, not for peace, but escape. A place where no one knew her as Thomas's wife. On a humid Wednesday in June, she was finishing her last class of the day when he walked in. Derek Vance. He wasn't the type Lena typically noticed. Rough around the edges, mid-30s, with a chiseled jawline and tribal tattoos that snuck up his forearms. He worked at the gym next door as a personal trainer, and when he entered the studio, it was only to deliver a misplaced protein package that had landed at their front desk. "Someone ordered vanilla whey?" he asked, holding up a box with a crooked smirk. The receptionist waved him toward Lena. "That's mine," she said, taking it, her fingers brushing his for a moment too long. "Didn't peg you as the protein shake type," he said, scanning her up and down. Not disrespectfully, but deliberately. Lena smiled. "There's a lot you don't know about me." He laughed and walked away. But that look, it lingered. Over the next week, he appeared more frequently. Sometimes in the hallway between classes, other times by the vending machines. Their conversations grew bolder. He teased. She flirted. He commented on her form in a yoga pose one day and casually offered to spot her if she ever wanted to lift something heavier than a mat. What started as harmless glances quickly turned into subtle invitations. Lena began arriving early, brushing her hair more carefully, choosing tighter yoga pants. She laughed louder when he was nearby. She noticed the way he watched her when she stretched, how his voice dropped when they were alone. Felt dangerous and delicious. Thomas, meanwhile, remained oblivious. He asked about her day, offered to pick her up from work once, and Lena lied, saying she had a late class. In truth, she was at a smoothie bar with Derek, legs crossed, eyes locked, heart racing. One evening, after a steamy conversation about chakras and tension release, Derek leaned in and whispered, "You know you don't belong in a cage, right?" Lena froze. The words weren't poetic. They were primitive, raw. They spoke to a part of her that had been buried under routine, dinner schedules, and passive affection. She didn't reply, but later that night, she dreamt of his lips and woke up breathless. Within 2 weeks, they were texting late at night. Within 3, they were meeting in Derek's apartment after her morning class, where he'd pin her against the wall and devour her like a secret he couldn't keep. She told herself it was just an escape, just something temporary, a way to feel young again. But passion makes promises it can't keep. And Derek, unlike Thomas, wasn't quiet. He was impatient, bold, and careless. One night, as they lay tangled in sweat and sin, Derek lit a cigarette and asked the question that would plant the seed of murder. "Do you ever think about what life would be like if he just wasn't around?" Lena laughed nervously. "Don't say things like that." He shrugged. "I'm just saying, you're not you when you're with him. You're just surviving. And surviving ain't the same as living." She said nothing, but those words wrapped around her brain like vines. Not around. Free. Alive. The next morning, she kissed Thomas on the cheek and brought him coffee. He thanked her, smiling the same old smile. Kind, unaware, and fading. And as she watched him sip the drink, Lena realized something chilling. She had already begun picturing life without him. And the picture was starting to feel beautiful. By the end of July, Lena Halden had perfected the art of deception. From the outside, she was the same soft-spoken yoga instructor. But beneath her composed surface was a woman juggling 2 lives, the dutiful wife at home, and the reckless lover behind closed doors. Every touch she gave Thomas now felt rehearsed. Every dinner conversation was a script. She no longer saw a husband. She saw a barrier. And the web was only growing. At first, Lena believed she could keep the 2 worlds apart, that she could steal moments of fire with Derek and still return to the safety of her quiet home. But lust rarely stays in its cage. Derek was beginning to change. He no longer hid his frustration. He wanted more. "When are you going to tell him?" he asked one night as she buttoned her shirt post-affair. "Tell him what?" Lena replied, barely looking up. "That you're not in love with him. That you've moved on. That you've got a real man now." Lena rolled her eyes. "It's not that simple." Derek scoffed. "It's exactly that simple. You're afraid. That's the truth." She said nothing. But in her silence, Derek saw it. Not fear, but calculation. Lena wasn't afraid. She was thinking, planning. That night, after returning home, Lena stayed awake long after Thomas had gone to bed. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the glow of her laptop. The search bar blinked. And then she began typing, "Can painkillers cause heart failure? Lethal dose of oxycodone in tea. Electric shock and cardiac arrest. Ways to make a death look natural." She paused after each query, reading carefully, scrolling down pages of medical reports, autopsy summaries, and forensic blogs. Her heart didn't race. Her palms didn't sweat. This wasn't an impulse. This was a blueprint. A few days later, she visited Mrs. Callahan, their elderly neighbor who had recently fractured her hip. Lena brought her groceries and flowers, and while the old woman was in the bathroom, Lena borrowed a few prescription bottles from her cabinet. Oxycodone, hydrocodone, tramadol. They looked harmless in her yoga bag, small white capsules that held death in disguise. At home, Lena crushed the pills into a fine powder and placed them in an empty vitamin bottle labeled Herbal Fiber Boost. She felt clever, confident, in control. Each day, she'd sprinkle just a pinch into Thomas's tea. Not enough to kill, but enough to slow him down. Enough to make his eyes glaze over. He began to complain of headaches, fatigue, strange muscle weakness. She encouraged him to rest, even offered to schedule him a checkup. He's probably just overworked, she told friends and family. Even Thomas began to believe it. Maybe I need a break, he admitted one night, slumping into the couch with a blank stare. Something feels off. Lena wrapped a blanket around him, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "You'll be okay." But he wouldn't be. Behind the scenes, she continued constructing her lie. A journal documenting Thomas's declining health, filled with false entries about his sleepless nights, memory lapses, and possible depression. She even planted empty pill bottles in his bathroom drawer and left a note in his phone calendar labeled, "Mental Health Check." She wanted the world to believe Thomas was slowly unraveling, that his heart might simply give out one day, that if he died in his sleep it would be tragic but not suspicious. But Lena wasn't relying on the pills alone. She needed something final, something that couldn't be traced easily. One evening, while browsing a dark corner of the internet she'd never visited before, she came across a forum post titled, "Homemade Shock Devices: How to Disable Without a Trace." Her stomach churned, not from guilt, but anticipation. By now, the web was tightening. The lies were layered. The act was set. All that remained was the moment where the husband she once promised forever to would die by the hand of the wife he trusted completely, and she would make it look like fate. August had rolled in with the kind of heat that made everything feel slower, including Thomas. He had stopped jogging in the mornings, often waking up groggy, his head pounding, eyes bloodshot. Lena played the role of the supportive wife flawlessly, placing a cold towel on his forehead, gently rubbing his back, and whispering reassurances like, "It's just stress, honey. Maybe cut back on the screens." But in reality, Lena had already started phase 1 of her plan. It began subtly, a quarter of a pill, crushed into near-invisible powder, mixed into his nightly chamomile tea. She chose chamomile deliberately. Its earthy taste masked the bitterness well. The first time she did it, she watched him closely, half expecting him to spit it out, to notice something. He didn't. He drank it all. And the next morning, Thomas complained about feeling off. His heart thumped irregularly. His limbs were heavy. He stayed in bed while Lena prepared breakfast downstairs, her movements crisp, her emotions deadened by resolve. That same day, she increased the dose. By the end of the week, half a pill was being mixed into everything. His tea, his water bottle, even homemade soup she claimed would help his cold. The effects were cumulative. His behavior grew sluggish. He forgot things, not drastically, but enough for her to plant seeds of concern. "I told you we had dinner plans tonight," she said, frowning. I thought that was next week." "Tom, are you okay? You're really not yourself lately." He nodded slowly. "I know. Maybe I should see a doctor." She offered to make the appointment. She never did. To the outside world, Lena's concern seemed genuine. She called Thomas's boss and explained that he needed a few days off. She even texted his sister, updating her on his condition, saying he was mentally and physically drained, possibly suffering from burnout. In truth, Thomas was being slowly sedated into oblivion. Each night, the dose increased, from half a pill to 1, then 2. By mid-August, Lena was slipping 3 crushed opioids into a single mug. Thomas no longer questioned the fatigue. He chalked it up to aging, lack of sleep, and maybe even depression. He spent most of his time on the couch, dozing off during conversations. His skin grew paler, lips chapped, speech occasionally slurred. He was unraveling just as she intended. But Lena wasn't reckless. She spaced out the heavier doses. She made sure there were good days in between bad ones. It had to look natural, like the slow spiral of a man losing grip, not the abrupt poisoning of a husband by his wife. And yet, Even as she rehearsed the story she'd tell the world, the fake health issues, the fabricated history of mental decline, a new anxiety crept in. The pills were working, yes, but it wasn't enough. Thomas, though weakened, was still alive. Too alive. She needed something irreversible. Something that wouldn't leave a trace in a toxicology report if things went wrong. Something that could work with the narrative of a sudden heart attack, a tragic end to a man already slipping. That's when she returned to her dark research. The stun gun idea had seemed absurd at first, too risky, too hands-on. But now it felt perfect. The forums she read claimed that when applied directly to the chest of a sedated or weakened individual, the jolt could cause cardiac arrhythmia or even a complete shutdown of the heart. Silent, quick, clean. Just one good jolt and Thomas could die in his sleep. Lena ordered the device under the alias Maria Keller. It was small, disguised as a flashlight, and promised intense voltage output for emergency use. It arrived 3 days later in a plain brown box. No questions asked. She tucked it into her underwear drawer, next to her wedding ring, which she had stopped wearing a week ago. Every night, as Thomas fell into his drug-induced haze, Lena sat beside him and stared at the man she once loved, or thought she did. Now he was simply an obstacle. One more dose, one more step. She was getting closer, and Thomas, in his clouded mind, had no idea that the woman who kissed his forehead goodnight was planning to kill him in his sleep. By the end of August, Thomas Halden was a ghost in his own home. He barely ate. His appetite had vanished along with his energy. His once meticulous grooming, always shaved, always ironed, had become disheveled. He no longer had the strength to argue, question, or even wonder why he felt like he was floating in a fog. And Lena, she was always there, smiling, soft-spoken, present, but never more absent in heart. He didn't know that every cup of herbal tea he sipped contained a higher and higher dose of opioids, slowly numbing his mind, breaking his body, weakening his heart. Lena had perfected the mixture. 3 crushed oxycodone pills in tea before bed. 1 more in his smoothie every morning. And on days when he seemed more alert than usual, she added a 5th dose to his lunch. There were now 15 pills missing from the stash she had taken from their neighbor's medicine cabinet. But Lena wasn't worried. She had started buying online. Unregulated pharmacies based in India and Mexico. Packages arrived weekly under different names. To the world, Thomas's health decline seemed tragic but explainable. The lie Lena built around him was firm. He was under stress, possibly depressed, burning out from work. She even suggested to his sister that he might be developing an autoimmune condition. He's always tired, you know? Pale, weak. I don't know anymore. Behind her crocodile tears, Lena was preparing for the final phase. The shock plan. The stun gun sat in a drawer like a snake coiled for attack. She tested it on a piece of meat in the garage freezer. Pressed it, waited, zapped. It smelled like burnt flesh and left a dark round imprint. Effective. Silent. Controlled. But Lena wasn't reckless. She knew the risk. Bruising, forensic signs, burn patterns. So she decided the perfect time would be after a maximum dose, when Thomas was so sedated he couldn't move, speak, or even cry out. The death would be marked as a cardiac arrest, accelerated by his mysterious health issues. The opioids would be chalked up to possible self-medication, perhaps even suicide. She would play the grieving widow, collect the life insurance, modest but enough. Start over. With Derek, or so she thought. Derek was growing impatient. He had started asking questions Lena didn't want to answer. So what's the plan? When are you leaving him? You said he's almost gone. But you've been saying that for weeks. Lena hated how he talked now. Like he was entitled to the next step. Like she owed him something. She snapped once. I'm risking everything, Derek. You think this is easy? You think I can just walk out and say, sorry, I killed my husband for better sex and protein shakes? He stared at her with narrowed eyes. I'm not the one living a lie. For the first time, Lena felt something strange when she looked at Derek. Not love. Not desire. Contempt. This was never about Derek. He was a tool. a spark that lit the fire, but now she was the one in control. And she didn't need anyone complicating that. That night, she poured Thomas his tea, now laced with 5 full pills, and sat beside him on the couch, gently stroking his hair. His eyes fluttered, his lips trembled. He tried to say something, but the words never formed. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "I love you," and she did. Or at least she once did. But that was before the web. Before the lie became life. Before the murder plan became more real than her marriage. She stood up, walked upstairs, and opened the drawer. The stun gun waited. She picked it up and tested it once. A high-pitched electric crack split the silence. Startled even her. One more dose. One more night. The escalation was over. The end was near. The night was unnaturally quiet. No wind rustling through the trees. No distant hum of passing cars. Just the sound of the ceiling fan spinning lazily above the bed and the shallow, labored breaths of Thomas Halden. He lay there barely conscious. His eyes, half-lidded and glassy, followed the ceiling with disjointed focus. His skin had a yellowish tint under the dim bedroom light. His cheeks hollowed slightly over the last few days. His body was already surrendering, he just didn't know it. Lena stood in the hallway, watching the flickering shadows across the floor. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks. Tonight's mixture had been her strongest yet. 5 crushed oxycodone pills, 2 stolen diazepams, and a few drops of Benadryl to push him deeper into sedation. By the time she led him to bed after dinner, Thomas could barely lift his arms. His words slurred into nonsense, his pupils uneven. She had smiled, kissed him on the cheek, and tucked him into bed. But now she stood alone, her heart thumping against her ribs like a drumbeat in a war she had already won. In her hand was the stun gun, black, compact, and buzzing with stored electricity. The label on the side claimed it had 950,000 volts of stopping power. She had watched videos, read posts, even downloaded an obscure guide on fatal application. The trick, they all said, was proximity and placement. Direct to the chest. Right above the heart. The body does the rest. Her breathing slowed as she walked into the room. Thomas stirred weakly. One arm flinched. He tried to lift his head. "Lena," he murmured. Barely a whisper. A child's breath. She froze. There was something terrifyingly human in that moment. Something that almost pulled her back. But her grip tightened. She sat beside him, brushing his damp hair back with one hand. Her fingers trembled. "Shoo," she whispered. "Just rest now." Then, with practiced movement, she slid the bedsheet down and pulled his shirt aside to expose his chest. She hesitated, just long enough to feel her soul screaming through the silence. Then she pressed the stun gun to his chest. A flash of blue light lit up the room for a fraction of a second. Crack. His body jerked violently. Then silence. His legs twitched. Fingers curled. Eyes fluttered once. Twice. Then nothing. Lena sat back, breathing hard, heart pounding louder than it ever had in her life. She looked at him, waited, watched. No movement. No breath. No sound. She placed her fingers against his neck. No pulse. Her hand trembled as she retrieved her phone from the nightstand and dialed 911. 911. "What's your emergency?" "My husband," she gasped, perfectly rehearsed. He collapsed. I think he had a heart attack. He's not breathing. Is he conscious?" "No. Oh my God. Please, he's not moving." His lips are turning blue. "Ma'am, stay calm. We're dispatching an ambulance now. Can you start CPR?" I don't know how," she wailed. She hung up the phone, dropped to her knees beside the bed, and let out a dry sob. One she forced from her throat as sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Within minutes, red and blue lights painted the windows. EMTs rushed inside. Lena let them in, her eyes swollen, her voice cracking. She clutched Thomas's hand like a grieving wife. They tried reviving him. CPR, oxygen, defibrillator. Nothing worked. Thomas Halden was declared dead at the scene, just after 11:47 p.m. The preliminary cause? Cardiac arrest. The body showed no external wounds beyond light bruising on the chest, explained away as attempted CPR by Lena. They took his body, covered him in a white sheet, rolled him away, and Lena sat on the edge of the bed, weeping into a tissue she had stained with fake tears and sweat from her own performance. It was over, or so she thought. Paramedics declared Thomas dead just before midnight. Lena cried in front of them, clutching her robe, pretending to be in shock. She told the officers that Thomas had been unwell for weeks, possibly depressed, maybe overworked. One EMT asked about the bruising on his chest. She said she tried CPR before calling 911. They believed her. The body was taken for autopsy. Lena stood at the door, hands shaking, eyes dry by the time they left. The next day, Lena told everyone it was sudden. A tragic, unexpected heart attack. She called Thomas's office. She called his sister. She hosted a small vigil in their backyard. She was calm, composed, even smiled weakly when someone said, "At least he didn't suffer." She kept busy. She deleted her search history. She tossed the stun gun in a lake nearby. But she forgot one thing. The pills in his system wouldn't disappear. The toxicology report came back 2 weeks later. Lethal levels of opioids, oxycodone, diazepam, and traces of other sedatives. None prescribed. Investigators became suspicious. Why hadn't she mentioned medication? Why didn't Thomas have a prescription? Why were there odd burn marks on his chest? They reopened the case. Quietly, Lena had made one crucial mistake. She thought the lie was perfect. It wasn't. Detectives got a warrant for Thomas's computer and Lena's laptop. They found searches like, best way to cause heart attack at home, how to overdose someone slowly, stun gun heart failure. They also recovered texts between Lena and Derek. One read, "Soon it'll just be us. Promise. He's fading already." Lena didn't know, but she was already under surveillance. On a rainy Wednesday morning, police knocked on her door. They didn't ask. They arrested her. She cried, screamed, "I didn't kill him. He was sick. I loved him." But in the interrogation room, her story fell apart. Derek, under pressure, admitted he knew what she was planning and said he tried to stop her. That was enough. The courtroom was packed. Lena wore a black dress and fake sadness. Prosecutors called her calculated, manipulative, and unremorseful. The jury took just 6 hours. Guilty. First-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Derek was sentenced to 3 years for obstruction and failure to report a crime. Lena showed no emotion when the sentence was read. Just silence. Thomas's family never forgave her. The media dubbed her the widow of voltage. A documentary was made. Podcast episode went viral. Behind bars, Lena gives rare interviews. She claims she was pushed to the edge. But the world knows the truth. She didn't fall. She planned. And she executed.